The year was 1996. The comic book speculator bubble had burst. Marvel Comics was on the brink of filing for bankruptcy and was desperate to boost comic sales. Enter Heroes Reborn. Check it out. Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Chris and this is Northgarden Comics. Today's episode is part of a series I call Shortbox Showcase, and that's when essentially I pull some of the books out of my short boxes and share them or showcase them with you. And today we're going to take a look back at the books from Marvel's 1996 year-long event series called Heroes Reborn, and this event spanned across Avengers, Captain America, Fantastic Four, and Iron Man, each title running for 13 issues. Now, in just a minute, we will zoom in and take a look at these books, but if you're anything like me, I like to know some of the stories behind the stories, kind of a comics in context, if you will, especially when there are significant events going on in the industry and in the world that are affecting the stories that I read in the pages of those books every month. And where we're talking mid-90s, there is definitely some context to these comics. You know, the 90s, early on, we're in the heyday of the comic book speculator market, and comic book publishers are doing anything and everything they can to get people to buy not just one, but multiple copies of all the books that they publish. So they're cranking out variant covers, they're cranking out gimmick covers like holofoils and glow-in-the-dark covers and polybags. So you'll buy one copy and open it to read, and another copy to keep preserved and pay for your kids' college sometime down the road. We saw the launch of Image Comics in 1992, pulling some of the top talent of the time from Marvel Comics. We had the breaking of the Batman. We saw the death of Superman. All kinds of things, new number ones, you name it, comic publishers were doing it. By the time we get to the mid-90s, the speculator bubble had burst. Comic book sales were plummeting. Comic book stores were closing. Marvel was about to file for bankruptcy and desperate to do something to reinvigorate comic sales. And that's when they rebooted these titles with brand new number ones, they updated the origin stories, and a key piece of this is that they outsourced the editorial duties to Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and their respective studios instead of using in-house talent. So with that as the backdrop, let's zoom in and take a look at these books. All right, as we get started here, I explained a little bit about how we got here from a publisher perspective, but in story, there's still the question of how did we come to reboot these four titles and nothing else, for example. And the way that was explained in story is that at this time in the Marvel Universe, the big bad guy was Onslaught, and he was a physical manifestation of essentially the worst parts of Magneto and Charles Xavier, and both the X-Men and Avengers heroes were fighting him. They at some point defeated his physical form, but then what was left was this seemingly unstoppable energy form of Onslaught, and it was probably Reed Richards. Somebody came up with the idea, said, you know, if we give him a new physical form to absorb and hold that energy, we can then just completely destroy that physical form. And I think it started with Thor, where he says, you know, I'll do it, and it's too much for him to hold all at once, and so other heroes start to sacrifice themselves to be that host body or part of the host body of Onslaught. And as they're doing that, it's realized that, wait, the X-Men can't do this because they're mutants, and if a mutant were to become part of that physical form again, then Onslaught would be able to use that against everybody, and they wouldn't be able to defeat him. So that's kind of how they explain, you know, keeping the X-Men out of this reboot, and it worked well because I'm sure the X-Men were doing just fine at this time, coming off the heels of their Age of Apocalypse event, so these were the titles that Marvel wanted to focus on. The one other notable exception is Captain America, because prior to this reboot, Mark Waid, Ron Garney, they were kind of at the helm for this title, and they had been seeing increasing sales, and the fact that it was still pulled in as part of the reboot, I've read that, you know, that was another point of frustration for those creators. But of course, in continuity, everybody thought that they died, when in reality, young Franklin Richards created a pocket universe using his mutant ability and stuck all these heroes into that pocket universe, and eventually when the event ended, that's when all these heroes were brought back. But they all received new treatments on their origins. For example, Captain America, I don't think he ever goes on ice in this origin. He basically gets his mind reprogrammed and he gets a new life. And that happens to him several times as he starts to remember who he is. They just reset him again, and that's done by Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. And I think at some point where we kind of pick up this volume is that he, with the help of Sam Wilson's dad, who I think they say he fought with in World War II, the dad actually had the shield, and through a series of events, jars Captain America Steve Rogers' memory. He remembers who he is, and then he teams up with S.H.I.E.L.D. again, and so now he's a man out of time, but he was never frozen on ice for decades. But Rob Liefeld and his Extreme Studios were in charge of Avengers and Captain America, and Jim Lee and Wildstorm were doing Fantastic Four and Iron Man. And so a lot of these covers, you see a lot of Rob Liefeld covers, Jim Lee covers, and Wiles Portacio does a lot of the covers on Iron Man. We'll kind of just work our way through here. There's even a variant of Avengers #1. Art there is by the interior artist, Chad, I want to say his last name, maybe you pronounce it Yape, Y-A-E-P. So forgive me if I'm saying that incorrectly. He did a variant of #1. And they do a couple crossover stories in this as well to tie some stories through. But in 13 issues, there's really not a whole lot you can do to really build some backstory. And by the time they ended, then it was time to reboot back into the main Marvel Universe. Overall, Marvel did see some really good sales from these, so in that sense it was a success. But like many things from the 90s, it's received, with mixed reviews. Some people really strongly hate it. Some people like it. I don't know that we can say that anybody absolutely loves these. I did not collect these as they were coming out. I was reading the X-Men titles, and the reason I went back to get these was largely for nostalgia. It's Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, whatever your feelings on this period of the 90s, if you lived through it, there's definitely a nostalgic feeling that comes from seeing the colors, the covers, the interior art. So I wanted to add them to my collection, more from the perspective of being a collector, and because I like to buy books cheap, and these are books that you can pick up pretty inexpensively. I think I got everything here for either 50 cents or $1, maybe at most. So if you want to have them, it's pretty low risk or low investment to be able to add these to your collection. Now I will say that as we kind of hit this point in the series, I think it was after 6 issues or so, Marvel was renegotiating the contract and Jim Lee accepted it. Rob Liefeld did not. So his books were handed over to Jim Lee's studio from issue in like that 7 or 8 range all the way through. And I think that's where we saw, I want to say, oh right, because these were Liefeld's. Maybe it's on the next one. Yeah. You can see starting with #8 there, and I do like that cover by Jim Lee. But you can see with Avengers #8, the writing duties are taken over by Walt Simonson, and so he took that the rest of the way through. And Captain America, let's see, you got Robinson doing the writing there. Don't know his first name. But yeah, so Liefeld only did the first half, and then Jim Lee's studio took over for the remainder of that. And that's a cool Jim Lee cover of the Thing. And as we kind of get into these issues 11, 12, 13, you can see we start into this kind of you'll see a final crossover that happens here as they lead back to Heroes Return, and there was a 4-part miniseries that showed how the heroes came back to the main Marvel Universe. I haven't ever picked that up, even though I've seen it many times, and after going back and having read all of these, I'll probably grab those just to complete that and be able to have that story to read. It was originally going to go for 12 issues, and then it was something with they couldn't get the editorial, Marvel couldn't get their act together in some way, and so it wound up going for 13 issues instead of 12. How did I get behind here? And this World War III was the kind of the final story for Heroes Reborn. And like I said, would be followed by Heroes Return. Alright, that's going to do it for this short box showcase spotlighting the books from Marvel's 1996 Heroes Reborn event. I'll say that the 1990s in comics evoked some pretty polarizing reactions. And as for me and my response to this event series, I didn't love it, but I definitely didn't hate it either. I will say it's pretty representative of comics and the industry at the time, so in that sense I do think it's a valuable addition to my collection. What are your thoughts? Do you own it? Have you read it? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you want to know more about Heroes Reborn? I'm going to put a link in the description that goes to an article that'll go into more detail about the event and Marvel and what was going on at the time. And do you like the Shortbox Showcase? If so, check out this video where I spotlight the books from my Marvel Transformers comics collection. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.